Hey guys, first word today is graph, which is a good thing for us. Simple rational functions. Functions have fractions in them, so we're going to graph functions with fractions. Here we go. Parent function. This is an important slide. If you can get this slide, the rest of the day is going to be downhill from here. So the parent function is this right here, is f of x equals 1 over x. That's what our function is going to look like today. We're going to have a number on the top, a constant, and some x's in the denominator. So that's kind of where we're going. The graph is a hyperbola, which looks like this. There's two curves, usually one in the first quadrant, one in the third quadrant, but it can be reflected, obviously, across the x-axis with a negative. Those parts are called branches. The domain or range is everything except for 0. If you look at it, the x-axis is a horizontal asymptote right through here. The graph never touches the x-axis. The y-axis is a vertical asymptote. It never touches the y-axis. And you have a curve in the first quadrant and the third quadrant. Any graph that's in this form has the same asymptotes, domain, or range as this function. We're just going to shift it around a little bit today using our same old shifting gestures and reflections and stuff like that, and graph the same type shape all day long. So let's look at a couple. All right, first one says graph y equals 6 over x. And the only difference here from the one you just saw on that last slide is there's a 6 instead of a 1. So technically what that means, it's a vertical stretch by 6. So what I did, I took a picture obviously, but the graph, the blue graph is the one you saw last time. The blue graph is just y equals 1 over x. And look what happens when you multiply it by 6. It gets stretched vertically. I went ahead and found a couple of points, and what I did, the smart thing to do when you have something like this, like 6 over x, is find x's that actually go into your 6. Like I used 2 and 3. Like I put 2 in there and I got 3. I put 3 in there, I got 2. So those are those 2 points. Then I did the same thing with the negative. I put a negative 2 in and a negative 3 in, and I got obviously negative 3, negative 2. So that's where those 2 points came from. Drew my curve, drew my curve, and there's your graph. Asymptote still here and here. Domain and range is still everything except for 0. All right, now we're gonna move it around a little bit. I think you probably should have known this was coming. So we're gonna see this gonna look like this now. And we notice we have an h and a k. The h is in, listen to this, it's in the denominator with the x, which means it's gonna shift it left or right opposite of what you think. The k is outside the fraction, which means it's gonna shift it up and down exactly like you think. The asymptotes are gonna be the shifts, all right? The asymptotes are gonna shift h. That's going to be your vertical asymptote. You're going to shift k, up and down. That's going to be your horizontal asymptote. And this, what's going to happen is your 2 branches are just going to move with the asymptotes. I'm going to show you 2 of these, and that should be enough, and we'll call it a day. All right, first one says graph negative 4 over x plus 2 minus 1. So the first thing I did is I noticed there's an x plus 2, which shifts the graph 2 to the left. So if you look at my red line on my graph right here, I move my asymptote from the y-axis 2 to the left, to right there. There's also a minus 1 in the front, so I shifted my graph down 1, so my horizontal asymptote went from the x-axis down 1. And usually my branches or my curves are my hyperbolas in the first and third quadrant, but because there's a negative 4, it got reflected across the x-axis. That's the same thing as having a negative in the front. So it got shifted or reflected. Instead of being up here like this, it got shifted down there. And instead of being down here like this, it got shifted up there. So that's what happened. And I picked a couple of points just to see how far I was. And again, be smart when you pick these points. I picked negative 3 because that gave me a negative 1 on the bottom, which is nice. I also picked picked me a negative 4 because that also gave me a number in my denominator that goes into positive 4, so they worked out really good. Did the same thing on the bottom level down there and got my 2 curves. Now, it also says state the domain and range. Your domain now just switch. Your domain is all x's except for, if you look where it crosses, like it's going left and right forever, except it skips that vertical asymptote, which is at negative 2. So my domain is all x as long as they do not equal negative 2. My range is going to be all y's, but look, if it goes up and down forever, except for it skips this horizontal asymptote, so all y's except for negative 1 would be my range. So go one more. Okay, last one here says state the domain and range, graph y is 2x plus 1. First thing I noticed is this right here. I have a -3 in the front. Sorry, in my denominator, which shifts my asymptote over to the right 3, which is what this is. It looks like it's 1.5, but if you look at the axis down there, it's going by 2s. Now, my horizontal asymptote got shifted up 2 because of that 2 right there. You multiply the numerator by 2. We'll talk more about that as we advance, but that's what caused that to happen. And because there's no negatives, it does not get reflected at all. So my curves are still first and third quadrant like they have been. And I picked points again that would work out really well for me. Well, one of them, the other one I had a hard time finding. So I just estimated where those points were on the graph. Domain and range. So my domain is all x except for 3 because it's going left and right forever, except for the vertical asymptotes. So your domain is going to be whatever does not make your denominator 0. Like it always has been. Your domain is going to be whatever does not make the denominator 0. Your range, all y's except for, look where the horizontal asymptote is. It is at 2. And so the y, your graph does go down and up forever except for at 2. So y can equal anything except for 2. And we'll talk more about that one tomorrow. This is a big deal. We're really going to talk more about even the next day as far as having a number on the top, like a numerator like that. It's kind of a hard one, but that's okay. We'll get through it, and I'll see you in class tomorrow.